First of all is to say that the reason we have the recommended list is to look for new varieties which are giving you more of a competitive advantage, but it has to give you an economic return too. And obviously the new varieties come on through a few years of trialling, but they do stay on beyond there. And actually I do want your help to find out how we can get even more information just to see how well they do in their commercial life as far as being economic. So what we want to do is to see how the results from the recommended list also compare with commercial information which market intelligence provide, and also see if we can look at other ways of dividing up the country, for example in climatic regions. So for those of you who may be aware, it has to, for example, yield is still king as far as the recommended list varieties are concerned, but they have to meet the market requirements. And there are also minimum standards, usually for lodging and also for diseases. And these are under continuous review. So if you do have any concerns or issues, please come back to us because we can always improve on the system. I have to mention the 8 wheat varieties we put on the recommended list this year. There's one Group 1, which if I was the breeder, I would be beaming from ear to ear. Now this is a really good variety here. It's a provisional Group 1 variety, so it gives the market what they want. It's got excellent agronomics, orange wheat blossomage, so overall that seems to me to be the sort of variety we should be recommending. We have 2 Group 2s. First of all is Cubanita, a high-yielding Group 2 that meets the market requirements, and also Cashel, which is a more of a specific variety which provides you more with high gluten. So there are opportunities to have these more specialist varieties on the list. There are 2 Group 3s. The first is Zulu. Again, it's a higher yielding Group 3 biscuit wheat, and it also has potential for export and blossomage resistance. Icon's the second one. Again, it meets the market requirements, and it also has the flexibility of providing you with a good distilling product as well. As far as the Group 4 soft wheats are concerned, there's 2 which have a regional basis, high yielding. First one is Panacea, again good for distilling, and the other one, Twister, which has done exceptionally well in the north, where you get a yield of 109%, and also for that region is pretty good for distilling. And finally, if you're looking for hard feed wheats, then we have a high yielding variety in Evolution. But not only is it high yielding, but you can also see it has a very good agronomic package too. So I hope you can see that this brings all the varieties on a further step, be it in quality or agronomics. Now, one thing I wanted to draw your attention to is that for the wheats, the categories are very much based upon the quality, and then we have this Group 4. You may see that as feeds, but can we tease it out a little further as to what we've got in that group? But before we go there, the first thing is that we could say, well, do we need more information? We also already provide information on distilling. Do we need to provide you with more information on the feed quality? For breakfast cereals, which may be more in the Group 3, are we providing enough there? Likewise, how about specialist quality or biofuels? But before we go and start to spend your money on that, the next thing is, well, will the market actually give you extra money if we did that? So there's all sorts of things going on here that the market may require extra information for it, but what would be good if at the end of the day you then got a premium for that information. The recommended list of trials tend to mirror the wheat area. We can't have trials everywhere, and I'm sure you can see that there are potentially gaps, and we'll come on to those later. But first of all, here you can see the yields from recommended list trials over the last 6 years. And this is where I want your help, really, is that we have commercial information on quality, but what we'd really like is can we get, be it real in-farm field yields, which are accurate, or for that matter, yields from trials, which may in effect be variety trials, but perhaps based on different fungicide inputs. And even more importantly, could you cost that? Because that's very important as far as the economics is concerned, as to whether we can actually put economics on this. Because you may say, we use very high inputs for the recommended list trials. There's a reason for that. but I'm sure there's an awful lot of information out there which HGCA could independently collate. Here we have the specific weight information for the recommended list in green and for the market intelligence in blue. So apologies if you're colourblind, because you probably won't be able to see the difference. But what you can see here, the first thing is that the results do mirror from year to year. So what we're finding is that in a year where we have high specific weights in our trials, that's what has been reflected in commercial samples. And 2012, we know that was a poor year for specific weight. Perhaps the recommended list trials did slightly better, but perhaps we were using slightly higher inputs than most commercial crops. One way we did look at this as well is to see whether there were patterns as far as the ripening dates of these varieties and specific weight. So what you have here is all the varieties over a 6-year period, and the specific weight, both as far as the recommended list is concerned and the commercial information, based on the early maturing varieties down to the later maturing varieties, against the yield. Now, with our criteria, I said that yield is important, but we have to bear in mind there has to be a counterbalance. Because if we go for a drive in yield, I think you can see that we're heading for later maturing varieties. And it's those later maturing varieties are actually giving you the lower specific weight. So this is how we can use the information to make sure that by focusing on one particular aspect isn't leading to compromises as far as the quality is concerned. And just to show you how many varieties we have in each of these groups, I think you can see that the majority would perhaps fit into the later than solstice group, but we do have 6 varieties on the current list which we would put as being on the later side. So this is something we just need to be aware of as we start to look at future varieties. As far as the Hagberg falling number is concerned, you can see here that, again, the recommended list mirrors commercial samples year by year. The recommended list trials, the Hagberg falling numbers happen to be lower than the commercial samples. That may well be because we have a wide range of varieties in the trials, and I suspect the harvest is a compromise. As far as a grower who's growing a quality wheat's concerned, they will get it spot on. And this is purely for the quality groups 1s and 2s here. But I think what it shows is that if we are getting this mirroring, if we start to drill down on the recommended list data, we may start to learn some lessons which may in fact help you as growers. Likewise, we have protein. We measure the protein levels. Now, this is where, in effect, you can see that there are slight differences as far as the patterns are concerned. In particularly 2010, the first thing is that the protein levels in the majority of our recommended list trials tend to be lower than the quality survey. But for some reason, 2010, it didn't seem to mirror what was happening there. But again, it may be that if we had commercial information, that may show that what we're doing with our recommended list trials is we're taking the best bit of land, we're putting much more fungicide on because we want to keep all diseases out. We're going for yield, but we're not necessarily getting the protein. Now, also with the recommended list, we measure as far as the soil, what the soil type's concerned. And this shouldn't be of any surprise, but that's important because the thing is if the recommended list shows the obvious, then that means if we further down the line we get some other interesting, unusual things, then that we can potentially take those a little more seriously to try and find out, what's going on. So again, no surprises that wheat grown on heavy land is giving you the higher yields. Again, this is 6 years data. Those grown on light sands yield less, and for a definition that these shallow soils tend to be those on chalk. Now, this was this year's trials, and all this is showing is the relative yield from this year on the different soil types compared to the 5-year average. So what you can see here is that those trials on the silt soils yielded below average this year. Not surprisingly, those on light sand did, which will probably be a reflection of the dry summer. I have no specific reason why this could go. I could perhaps suggest maybe the wet winter that year may have affected rooting, and that may be a reason why. But going forward is that if we had more information about the soil conditions, we might be able to actually provide you with more information. The medium soils actually yielded higher than average from our trials in this particular year. Now, as far as sow dates, and this is, Stephen Moss brought in the blackgrass, and you had a magic date. I think we should have talked to you, because your magic date was the 7th or 8th of October, wasn't it? And I think this is where we can use our information with information from research. So if Stephen is saying that if you sow in particular windows, then it's going to improve your control of blackgrass. What we could have done with this is to see whether, in effect, we have information which can assist you to show what happens over the last 6 years as far as the yields are concerned, both in a trial situation or potentially in a commercial situation, and then put some economics on that. And then that might be a way of then assisting you with your information to say, okay, if you do that, then these are the potential implications. And I think that's something we should be working with you in the future. But here you can see on this situation, no surprises. You may say, well, that's not really early. We do have earlier trials, but because we're using less varieties, they're not necessarily in this data set. But yeah, the early drill trials have the yield. Just watch this year, because obviously early drilling plus mild autumn could mean yellow rust. And I know that Jonathan Blake said he wanted more brown rust resistant varieties. But actually, of the 8 varieties that we put on the list this year, just 3 have scores higher than he wanted. But as far as yellow rust is concerned, 7 of those 8 varieties had a good yellow rust score. Specific weights and the drill date. Again, this is just all observations at this point. This perhaps is a little more up and down, but I just thought it was intriguing that in our earliest sown spot, the specific weight was actually lower than it was in our timing in October. And again, that's perhaps something we need to drill down a little further, is to find out that what is it about these early drilled crops that in our trials information we're finding that slight drop. And that may be important in those extreme years like 2012. It may be no issue at all in the other 9 years out of the 10. Protein, likewise, as far as the recommended list, again over the 6 years, what you're seeing is this fall off in the trials which are sown in November. So what we're probably seeing here are things which you're aware of, but this may at least help to understand what exactly is happening, because what this may allow us also to do is to say, okay, that may be the common feature, but what if we find varieties which buck the trend? And if we find that, you can then take that information back to the geneticists. And what we're really doing here is doing the boring science, which people don't necessarily like. It's going to see what crops look like, collecting that information, be it in an accurate, systematic way, and then giving it to those who understand the genetics to see if we can link the two together. Here we have crop rotation and specific weight. It comes to perhaps no surprises that, as you know, in second wheats you get lower yields. That could be down to a wide range of aspects, usually with take-all, and as a result, the specific weight in a second wheat crop will be lower. And I think what was interesting in that 2012 year, yes, the specific weights were low, but if you look at the second cereals, in fact, the drop was greater than we find in a normal season. So there seemed to be an accentuation in that particular year. Now I want to look at as to how we can actually categorize varieties in a slightly different way, and that's through regional climatic regions. What I've started with is the Met Office regions, and they're big regions, but first of all we need to have is also our own information as far as getting our weather stations onto our trial sites. Because what we may find is that that 2 regions which are geographically different may in fact be climatically similar. And we can use the analysis to see whether varieties perform in similar ways in very different geographical areas. That said, in this area in particular, you may find that we need to drill down further, because here we may find that within one of our big regions we have cool, wet component areas and also warmer, drier areas in particular seasons. But by having weather stations on each site, that would allow us to drill down even further. But obviously, if you drill down too further on your field trials, you end up with one or two trials and you can't make any conclusions from it. But that said, the other thing is, well, should you have more trials if you need this sort of more in-depth information? I know I'm running out of time, so some of this I may have to perhaps go through a little faster so we're not taking your time. But if we're looking at the yields on a geographical basis, this is all in your notes, and we can tease out the yields in different regions over the last 6 years. And here you can see the southeast tends to give you the highest yield over the 6 years. But this last year, the average yields we found were lower in that particular region. Likewise, we found in Scotland the yields were lower than average compared to the 6 years. Southwest, however, they were higher. But as far as the specific weight is concerned, likewise, here's the 6-year average, and on the whole, if you want high specific weights, it's the east area where you go for, and not the southwest. But for this particular year, actually you can see most areas were above average, and particularly in Scotland. But you can see in the southwest, they were below the 5-year average. Hagberg falling numbers, again, what the information is really reflecting what you saw. You had a good harvest, and Hagberg falling numbers, if we look at these from the 5-year, were above average in all our regions. Even the north, you can see, where we had pretty high Hagberg falling numbers. Now, I think if you go back to the specific weights, we'll probably ask, well, could we have predicted that we were going to have a year where specific weights were going to be low? Now, these graphs here, all this shows is, in effect, the specific weights from the commercial and the RL trials linked to rainfall and sunshine during the grain filling period. Now, with the luxury of hindsight, what we've got here, we have 2012 data on it. And because it was an extreme season, it allows us to put points at these extremes. So I think you can see that if you got rid of those high extremes of rainfall and also sunshine, it would have been probably very difficult with the data set to have actually, as the season went on, to predict that it was going to be a low specific weight. So in some ways, although it was a bad year, by collecting information from an extreme year, it helps us to learn more for the future. And let's just say that if we have more extremes, we may add more dots to these, and in time, maybe actually improve our forecasting as to whether it's going to be a higher or lower quality year. Just finally, the thing which we want to look at with the recommended list, and that is if you do have unpredictability as far as seasons go, are some varieties more predictable when you have these extremes? Now, there have been for a number of years a wide range of different methods which the statisticians can use. And what we're doing is we're speaking with them to see whether we can use our data set to actually just look at the past performance of varieties to see if any of them actually perform particularly well in extremes, or for that matter, first of all, if we look at what we call the sensitivity, and this really means is that if you define a good and poor environment, and that's probably easier said than done, but that's the first thing we need to do as to how we define our extremes, because the extremes can obviously occur at any time of the season. But then you look to see how each individual variety compares with the average of varieties, is to see whether in effect they perform above average compared to all the other varieties in all those extremes. Likewise, what we can do is look at the stability of a variety, which is really to see whether a particular variety is going to perform in a stable way from the southwest up to Aberdeenshire. And what we hope to do is that if we can get the right data, then the next step is, do we have trials in the right area because if we have trials in the different extremes, then we'll get more information in order to get an accurate measure of these sensitivities and these stabilities. So it's just a matter as to how we go forward to take the recommended list to provide us with a variety which we can put on the list today, but also provide information on how that variety is potentially going to perform over its lifetime, which for certain varieties can be through an awful long period of time, just as long as we can then provide you with more information as about the reliability of a variety as far as these changes are likely to be, as far as the environmental conditions are concerned. So all I want to do there is just finish just with the conclusions, which are really based upon the information I gave, is to say, please look at the recommended list. There's some really good new varieties there, some for, which will be of use across the UK, some which have more regional information. Also is to say that we looked at the RL data, and some of the quality information does reflect what happens as far as the commercial information is concerned. But there is a plea as to how we can get more information on commercial information so that we can use the commercial and the RL together. Just a comment that the higher yielding varieties tend to be later maturing, and also there's this potential for them to have a lower specific weight. There's the linkage between sunshine and rainfall, and by collecting more extreme weather, we potentially may be able to give you a more accurate forecast, if we are able to actually collect more of this information from extreme seasons. Just a comment here, the early drilling obviously gives you the yield, but we do need to look carefully as to say that if you go too early, we already know that there's higher risks as far as disease are concerned and blackgrass control, but maybe we can go look further to see, well, what happens to the quality too. Likewise, no surprises, the later drilling will obviously impact on the yield and potentially the quality. And really it's matters to how we take all this forward in an environment which is both more unpredictable as far as the economics are concerned and also the weather conditions, to provide a little more information for you on the future of how varieties will perform. Okay, thank you very much.